Hello, my name is Garvin, and I read things and meander on about them on the internet for your entertainment. As per the demands of my ever-wise patrons, since March I have dived deeper and deeper into mermaid mythology and pop culture, and today, we're gonna crest the wave. We are finally looking at the most influential piece of mermaid fiction ever written, The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. As we go over this, I'm going to ask you to keep in mind all the other pieces of fiction we've covered and look for the influences, because it won't be subtle, and I will be discussing them later in the video. So see if you find something I don't mention and throw that in the comments, alright? But with all that said, let's see if we can finally catch this wave to shore, shall we? Now let's start with a brief overview of our author, Hans Christian Andersen. I'm not going to be able to touch a lot of his life, so just keep that in mind. Now, while The Little Mermaid might be his most influential work, you have at least heard of some of his other stories, like The Ugly Duckling, The Emperor's New Clothes, The Princess and the Pea, and you might remember a little Disney movie called Frozen, which is very, very loosely based on his story, The Snow Queen. Hans Christian Andersen was born in 1805. His mother was an illiterate washerwoman in her late 30s, his father a shoemaker in his early 20s, who had received an elementary school education and would read bedtime stories to Hans from the Arabian Tales. This is disputed, however, as there is a school of historians that maintain that Hans was the illegitimate son of the crown prince and an aristocratic woman. There is some circumstantial evidence to this, but nothing definite in my eyes. For example, Hans received a lot of support from the upper classes even early in his career. For example, King Frederick financed his grammar school tuition, and he received royal travel grants even before he was a famous author. But on the flip side, if I was a crown prince with an illegitimate child, I could find a better place to park this kid than in a poverty-stricken family. Either way, it is on record that Mr. Andersen not only managed to get a good education for someone of his birth, but became one of the most celebrated writers of Europe, and wrote not just fairy tales, but novels, plays, and travelogues. His success in writing was not mirrored with success in romance. He is known for some interesting but short affairs with other men, and a string of failed romances with women. There's a lot more I could say, but I don't want to get lost in the weeds here, so let's turn to the story itself. The Little Mermaid focuses on the youngest daughter of the Sea King, whose mother has sadly passed away, and therefore she is being raised mostly by her father and her paternal grandmother. She is the youngest of 6 daughters, and unlike her sisters, is utterly entranced with the idea of land and dry living. As a child, she maintained sea flowers in her garden in the shape of a sun, and kept a marble statue of a human in the hopes of seeing a real one someday. Luckily for her, her grandmother has the tradition of allowing each girl on her 15th birthday to head to the surface alone to see what she can see. Each of her sisters returns and shares their adventures with her, but she really wants to go herself. And it's through this that we also learn that mermaids are great singers, but our heroine is considered the greatest singer of mermaid kind. When at last her 15th birthday comes, the youngest mermaid is beside herself to head to the surface, and she is out of there like a rocket. So when she reaches the surface, she heads to the coast, closer to land than any of her sisters, and ends up right next to a human ship, a royal human ship. As she lays eyes on a human prince who is gracefully dancing and cheerfully partying with the sailors on this ship, celebrating, I guess, his birthday. And to her eyes, he is incredibly handsome on top of everything else. So she spends most of her time just watching him. But that leaves her unaware for when the seas grow rough and a storm blows up. And then the prince's ship sinks. The Little Mermaid frantically realizes that the prince will drown being an air breather, and she cannot live with that, so she saves him. And in doing so, the storm has blown them out to sea, and she realizes she has to swim back to the coast and park him someplace dry. Otherwise, he's just gonna die the minute, she leaves him, even though he's in a perfectly good ocean. And this takes her hours, because she is a small mermaid, and he is rather large for a human. But bring him to land she does, where he is discovered by a young lady who is being brought up in a religious school, who calls out the priest to save his life. Sadly for the mermaid, the prince was unconscious for the whole ordeal, so he does not remember her at all and believes that the young lady he saw on the beach is the one person who saved his life above everyone else. But we will return to this plot point. Like a lot of teenagers, the Little Mermaid develops a kind of fixation on the prince because of this memorable experience, and is devastated when she tries to find a way to meet her prince, only for her grandmother to basically sit her down and go, "Listen, that's impossible. Not only do mermaids live for 300 incredibly happy years before turning into sea foam, humans live rather short, miserable lives measured in a handful of decades, and then proceed to some sort of weird afterlife." I don't know. I'm more or less quoting her on that. And as you might have guessed, Grandma Mermaid thinks her people have got the better part of this deal. However, our heroine isn't going to give up, and when she can't find an above-board way to deal with this, she creeps off to the dark sea woods to meet the Sea Witch, who tells her yes, she can turn the Little Mermaid into a human, and on top of that, she will make the Little Mermaid super agile and graceful as a human. But there will be a price. Every moment she is on her feet will be pure agony. She will feel as if knives are piercing her feet. Plus, the Little Mermaid must give up her voice. Not in a neat, bloodless way, but by literally having her tongue cut out by the Sea Witch. And if that's not enough, if the prince marries another woman, the Little Mermaid will turn into sea foam the very next day. Now, honestly, if it was me, I would have sat the girl down and said, "Listen, this is a terrible deal. You don't even know this guy. I think you need to go away and think about this for like a couple of months. Find a hobby. See how you feel later." But the Little Mermaid, in the tradition of teenagers everywhere, decides to make what I can only describe as a terrible life choice, and allows her tongue to be cut out in exchange for human legs. She's given a potion, she swims upriver to where she knows the prince's palace is, drinks the potion, and turns into a mute human being. She is found on the shore of the palace gardens, and the royal family actually pretty much adopts her, especially the prince, who seems to regard her as a surrogate little sister or perhaps even a daughter, and she becomes rather famous for her dancing. Even though it's agonizing for her, she never gives any sign of this and dances because it makes the prince so happy. But try as she might though, the prince only seems to care about her as a friend or as a family member. This may be because he's actually a fairly good lad who knows he has to marry a neighboring princess, and he doesn't want to take advantage of this poor lady who's obviously been through a lot. I mean, her tongue has been cut out, and she washed up naked on the shore of his palace. There's only so much a person can bear, and this woman has clearly not had the greatest life, right? But this does make me feel like the game was rigged from the start. Because there's no chance the prince could ever marry her now, is there? And I can't help but wonder if the Sea Witch knew that and took the extra malicious step of making sure the mermaid could never communicate the problem to the prince, to make sure he could never try to find a solution. Well, they go to visit the princess that he's betrothed to, and the prince does confide in the Little Mermaid that he's gonna do his duty because he's a prince and it's his responsibility to the country to marry this woman to maintain peace and prosperity, but he's never gonna be able to romantically love this woman. The only woman he could ever romantically love is unfortunately beyond his reach because she is in a religious school, so she's likely studying to be a nun. Well, plot twist, the princess in question is the very girl from that religious school who found him on the beach. The royal family decided that sending their princess to a religious school was the best place to park this kid until the marriage. Kind of convenient. The prince is, of course, over the moon and tells the Little Mermaid so, which does break her heart, but she is determined to be happy for his sake, and to be fair, he's never been dishonest with her. He has never expressed any romantic interest in her, but has taken care of her as if she was his own little sister. So I can't fight it in my heart to call this dude a bad guy here, because he doesn't know. By the way, I am just going to throw this out here. I don't think this is part of Hans Christian Andersen's intended moral for this fable, but one thing I think you should take away from this story is no one can help you with a problem if you don't let them know the problem exists. So, share your problems with your loved ones, folks. That's the best way to get resolution. Sorry, I'm moralizing. I'll get off the soapbox and we'll move on. So, the wedding is being set up, and the Little Mermaid is trying to make peace with her fate. But her sisters show up, and they are all bald as a cue ball, and they reveal to her that they've bartered with the Sea Witch for a solution to save her life. They've traded all of their hair for a magic knife. And if she kills the prince on the night of his wedding, not only will she live, but she will change back into a mermaid and she can return home. And the thing with the tongue, they'll figure out a way to fix that later. The important thing is that you live and come home, is what they tell her. And again, this leaves me questioning just how much control does the Sea Witch have over this situation? Because this feels more like a setup to kill the boy, as the Little Mermaid seems to have been very carefully maneuvered into this situation. However, the Sea Witch did not count on just how selfless the love of the Little Mermaid was, because our heroine foils the plot by deciding she can't murder the prince over honestly loving someone else, despite the loss and pain that it causes her. So instead, as the sun rises, she throws herself into the sea, but instead of changing into sea foam, she is turned into a spirit of the air and told that she is going to be granted a chance to earn a soul by doing 300 years of good work of bringing pleasant, healing breezes to humanity, and if she works at that job well and diligently, she will be granted a human soul and entry into heaven. Which is kind of a smulchy ending in some ways, and it certainly is a, weird plot twist, but it's Hans Christian Andersen. He's gonna work in something like that, I guess. So, I think we can all see the influences from this story on the other movies and stories we've looked at here. Splash, for example, has a mermaid saving a boy and falling in love with him, only for him not being able to remember being saved by the mermaid, and trouble evolving from that. The lure has the setup of the mermaid turning into sea foam if her human lover marries someone else, unless she kills him. The Mermaid, the Chinese movie, has that human-mermaid romance where the mermaid saves the human's life. Ponyo has the same romance, on a childlike level, of course, but ask the question, what if the human saved the mermaid's life instead? While the fisherman in his soul asks, hey, what if instead of the mermaid trying to gain a soul, the human tried to get rid of his soul instead? As for the myths, Mr. Andersen seems to have rejected the medieval stance that mermaids have souls, and thrown away quite a bit. All the dark, predatory aspects, all the dangerous parts of being a mermaid, like being able to summon storms or see the future, all of that is gone. But he does keep the idea of mermaids singing before a storm and having beautiful voices. So, I guess there's that. Now, you may be asking, well, Garvin, how did you like the story? And I have to keep in mind this is a children's story, because I honestly thought Mr. Andersen spent too much time moralizing, but at the time, it was thought that the only reason for there to be children's tales was to teach proper behavior and morality. So that was something that was just going to be baked into the premise. Plus, Hans Christian Andersen also got a lot of pushback on his earlier stories for not having enough good morals in. So I can kind of see this as a reaction of his part of him turning to the critics and going, oh, you want more morals in my story? Here's enough morals. Is this enough morals? I hope you choke on them. I might be projecting a little bit here, but I kind of see that. But I can see why this story is memorable. It's the story of a girl who is honestly kind of manipulated, but also is very selfless and sacrifices herself to preserve somebody else that she cares about. So I can see why it's stuck in public memory, but I can also see why so many people have wanted to rewrite this and wanted to say, I like your starting point, but I hate where it ended. At least that's what I'm picking up here. Tell me what you think in the comments, though. With that said, I believe we've hit a good stopping point for this week. I hope you found this video informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or even subscribe. All of these help me in my eternal struggle against the dread Lord algorithm. Terror be on his name. I'd like to give a special thanks to Big Steve, my biggest supporter. I hope you enjoyed this story, big guy. Next week, we look at the animated feature Disney's The Little Mermaid. I hope you join me, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.